Matthew Holt, the healthcare blog, and I have another THCB spotlight. This is Chris Darland. He is the CEO of Peerbridge Health, which is a little bit of an unusual company for us to talk about on THCB because it's actually getting into the world, that crashing part of the world where diagnostics and digital and AI are kind of all sloshing together and hopefully improving healthcare. So, Chris, for those who don't know, I'm sure as many people, what does Peerbridge do? What is your tool, and what are you trying to achieve?
All right, at Peerbridge Health, we have an ambulatory ECG patch that you wear on your chest. And our general point of view is that there's a lot of power you can get from ECG, more than is being used today. So combining some quantum physics signal processing on top of some explainable AI tools, we think we're able to diagnose heart failure asymptomatically. We can diagnose sleep apnea, essentially give you a much bigger view of your cardiac health than maybe some of the point solutions that exist in the market today. So in development most of last year, and pivotal trials with the FDA this year, and excited to get it to market at the very beginning of next year.
So let's talk a little bit about the current state of, heart disease and people go to cardiologists and all the rest of it. What are people? So people have some either historical issue or they have an event or whatever. We hear a lot about people putting in stents and getting surgery and the rest of it. But
Sure.
people who aren't there, right, who are being monitoring it, there's AFIB, obviously there's implantable devices, there's a bunch of other stuff going on. What's kind of the spread of the world? And then there are people that just have high blood pressure and
Sure.
got a hypertension and being monitored for that. What does that world look like for now in terms of this kind of remote monitoring? Or does this all, we hear about patches and what have you, or does this all have to be done in the hospital or in the clinic? Or what is the world like for now? How do you think about it?
Yeah. So I think the general problem is that almost all of the innovation to date has been in what I kind of call sick care. So my grandfather, as an example, had heart disease for 20 plus years, in and out of the hospital constantly, which can be stressful for the family, as well as my grandfather in that case.
Sure.
And I think maybe the sad part of the industry is there's probably some conference rooms that would look around and say he's a great customer. A lot of procedures.
Yeah.
Like one of my earliest memories is him with like one of the plastic pill trays in front of you, where he'd take a handful of pills every morning, and not a lot of innovation to keep people out of the hospital.
Sure.
I think the current patches took a first step there. So they said, hey, rhythm irregularities or arrhythmias can be a potential precursor to heart failure or heart disease down the road. So a lot of companies have come out with pretty convenient, easy to wear, you can even set up at home, patches to look for rhythm irregularities, AFib as probably the most common. But I think the potential is much higher. So as an example, what we think with a little bit more signal or sophisticated signal processing is that there's a lot of really interesting data and what a lot of us would consider noise in the electrical signal of the heart today that can tell you things much bigger than just an arrhythmia or some kind of irregular heartbeat. It can actually give you signals about kidney health potentially, or give you signals about breathing issues, or even structural issues with the heart before you notice it as the common, shortness of breath or relatively benign early symptoms. So the potential is there, and it's just a matter of digging out the signals that the heart's trying to pass to us.
So let's talk a bit about how you do that first, and then we'll move on to like what might it mean. So let's start with how do you do that? You're the tool that's coming out, you said in trials now. What's the difference between that and the iRhythm patch and the stuff that people know about for the AFib?
So the tool we have right now is cleared, let's say for the basic arrhythmia market, the AFib piece, and the secret, at least from a device perspective, with our patch, is that it's a 3-lead patch, and it's based off Einthoven's triangle. So he was one of the early innovators in ECG. He won a Nobel Prize 100 years ago. What that allows us to do is, with these 3 leads, get to a full 12-lead ECG view. Now you've got a volumetric kind of electrical view of the heart, which is really important to understand structurally what's happening. So this 3-lead view to 12-lead makes us quite unique to start. And the layer we put on top, we say explainable AI, so that a lot of people are doing some deep learning work where you're throwing terabytes of data into a model, and you'll probably find some correlation that might work in the population of the training data set. Everything we're doing believe it or not, is actually it's in principle work done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s from brilliant scientists and electrophysiologists saying, hey, in a perfect environment, this is what you'll see in a heart that will lead you to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or this is what you should be looking for variable wise to measure cardiac output. But the real world isn't perfectly clean and never works in reality. So it's leveraging a lot of research historically with a unique signal fidelity that we have today in this 12 lead view to bring the academic world to life in effect. So that means that everything we're looking at is relatively basic. So it's, let's say, 20 variables or less, and we can look at a clinician and say, we came to this conclusion: the patient has stage B heart failure, and here's why. Here's what we see in the P wave. Here's what we see in the ST elevation. You may not see it in, a 10-second strip, but over 4 minutes with some rhythm information, there's a lot of power in the ECG. And we think explainability, I think, is going to be important for anybody to commercialize an AI product in the market today. And the device kind of design gives us a little bit of a head start for sure on the hardware side.
So how does that translate? So let's just before we get into the practice of medicine, how it's going to translate there. What's the patient experience right now? I know that people have like AFib sometimes have to wear that patch for a week or whatever, and get rashes or what have you. Not sure everyone does, but what's your expectation of the patient use of the device going to be? They're going to get sent home, from the hospital or from post discharge, or is it are you going to figure out ways to get to them earlier? And then what's their experience going to be?
Yeah, so the time of wear is a little bit at doctor's discretion. So the cardiologist may say, hey, I want to have it for 7 days or 14 days, and that's their decision. Important for us, outside of sleep, which of course you need to wear overnight, almost everything we do, we can do with 10 minutes.
Okay.
So some of the early clinics we've talked to is the feedback has been, this would be exceptionally helpful for us in the waiting room.
Yeah.
So if you can put this on and help us triage to an effect, not an emergency case, but triage to say, we've detected heart failure. We have this, list of 17 to 18 things we think we can chase. So that first cardiology appointment, or even better in primary care, it tells you what you need to worry about and what you don't. I think that's where it becomes a really exciting preventative tool, as opposed to just a monitoring tool for somebody who's maybe in late stage heart failure, where the utility is there as well. But if we're going to bend the cost curve, it's got to be caught early. And so that quick 10-minute wear, it also eliminates, what you might imagine are, rashes sometimes, because you're wearing an adhesive for sometimes upwards of 30 days. And really gives you a lot of the power you need in a relatively short amount of time.
So in terms of that, and then what are the likely set of sort of if you discover something earlier, what are the likely set of treatments? So we're probably here talking about putting people on new different types, or putting them on medication, or new different types of medication, or going with a procedure. What's the likely outcome now from, if we can get this level of diagnosis out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's it to an extent depends a little bit. So I think part of the power, as we've talked to a lot of clinicians, is that the patient context when you're with a new patient and a holistic view of all of the conditions they might have is incredibly important. It kind of has like a compounding impact,
right?
As opposed to just finding AFib. If you just find AFib, which a lot of times is actually caused by sleep apnea that's untreated, and you go do an ablation for the AFib but don't treat the sleep apnea, chances are it's coming back, and that's going to be a tricky second ablation, and it's going to be quite expensive. So in that case, it's, well, let's go treat the sleep apnea. Yeah. Maybe even avoid the ablation if we can get the sleep apnea under control. In the bigger case of, let's say, asymptomatic heart failure, the chance of success in living quite a long, happy life on basic pharmaceuticals and lifestyle changes, if you catch it in stage B, like this asymptomatic stage, is quite high. The problem is that 4 out of 5 cases of heart failure today are caught in the ER, and that's stage C, and your chances of living another 5 years are unfortunately less than 50%, and you end up in this readmission cycle. So I think any cardiologist would probably tell you, if I know that it's there, I can treat it, and we can get ahead of it. But if we don't see it until it's too late, then the tools are limited, and that's when the tools are likely invasive. and quite expensive and stressful for families and things like that I mentioned earlier. But it's only as good as the detection we have.
So you're envisioning, God, that's a big word for me at this time in the morning. You're thinking of a world where there is, a lot more access to early detection using your tool and potentially others or what
Right.
have you. Um, so two things. One is there's a lot of discussion, and this is not so much in this space, but a lot more in the sort of the preventative MRI space where people are getting whole body scans and it's called
Yeah.
Prenuvo and some others, and there's a bunch of back and forth about, or at-home testing. There's a lot of controversy about that. The Lancet just came out against it, even though it's, we haven't really had much at-home testing since, people invented the pregnancy test, basically. But
Yeah.
anyway, where do you think that you come out in this argument about, well, we'll have so many false positives and, this will be spread too widely and it'll be, people will be clogging out the medical system and they're not the sick people who need it versus we'll identify people early. How do you come out on that argument?
Yeah, the standard we're holding ourselves to is not that of a consumer device. So as we measure like ejection fraction,
Right.
example, we're comparing ourselves to an ultrasound. So we want to be able to hold ourselves to what a real hospital diagnostic standard would be. And we think there's an appetite to get this at home, but it only works if it's really inexpensive.
Okay.
Because the reality is even like heart failure, if you could go screen the 60 million people potentially with heart failure and put them in a hospital with an ultrasound, we will find them for sure. It's just not economically feasible, or in the case of rural populations, it's just logistically impossible. So a lot of our focus is how do we make this as inexpensive as we possibly can, which then enables, if I can do this for 10 minutes where it's only $25 to do a pretty thorough scan, or my biggest cost, which is kind of how we see it, is actually the shipping cost back and forth to the patient, then that's the only way you're going to enable an effective at-home solution. If it's $300, if it's $500, if it's a really expensive blood scan, invasive in that case, I'm pessimistic that it'll catch on. It's got to be a no-brainer, I think, for it to work.
So in that case, if you can do it for $25 and shipping, and it's like a thing you can ship out to anybody who's had a primary care visit, or
Yeah.
if you say anybody who's over the age of 65 or whatever the number is, right? I want this as kind of a thing like we do the at home. I do an at home test to not do to avoid a colonoscopy. I could the thing where you scoop your poop in the. I mean, if you can make it that kind of a price, right, where it's relatively cheap, you send the thing out and you get it back and you get the reading. What's your sense for how that becomes part of the sort of health thing? Do you think this is something that, we start looking at for for a whole class of people and you send out millions of these things? Assuming is that how you're basing the business model of the company?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we leverage the existing market today. So as a first commercialization path, anybody who's doing AFib detection and wearing these monitors to find an arrhythmia today will say, we can do that as well, and we can give you all this extra utility, and we can do it for 40% cheaper than anybody else in the market. So we start with the cardiologist, electrophysiologist, and then I think the sell for us is once we get that cost down, then you can go to a payer as an example and say, if you look at a certain population over 65 with a BMI of X with hypertension, those are going to be high prevalence of people who are going to end up in the ER. My dad at the end of a gravel driveway in Kentucky is a perfect example. So if we can get it inexpensively out to them, now the economics work to screen for where you would expect a positive rate in, let's say, 10 to 15%, because the costs you're going to avoid and the care you're going to provide in relatively inexpensive fashion will offset a $50 test. It probably doesn't offset a $500 test. And as you know, the payers are going to make an economic decision likely more often than not. So it has to be a very inexpensive tool for the population.
So if you're at the point now where you think that you've got a very economical tool, which is coming out soon, that can replace some of the stuff that we currently got in the market, and and I know people are still doing the Holter tests or whatever, taking the old things around or that, and obviously the rim patches. You've got a bunch of competitors out there you can replace. Yeah. You can extend that by being cheaper into a much bigger group of people. What do you think that eventually means for the way we treat heart disease right now? Because my impression is that, as you said, 4 or 5 of these things only get found out in the ER, and you know, should I be going short of cardiac cath units? I don't know what that trade is, but yeah,
Yeah,
are you expecting, should I be selling the stent, selling the stock of the stent manufacturers? And how do you think we end up if we get to that level of prediction and start treating people with medication? Or do you think we end up with a lot of people who weren't getting stents earlier because we discover stuff? What do you think happens?
yeah, it probably depends on who you ask. But here's where I would like to see it go. So
Yeah.
if we're materially successful, then I think your first hypothesis is right. We should be catching things and ultimately treating it before invasive measures and before it's an emergency, which would likely decrease the amount of procedures and decrease a lot of the implantables, especially if we can show the same amount of efficacy on something that's non-invasive versus invasive to understand what's happening with the cardiac space. Then I think it shifts our way. I'm optimistic that at some point we're going to hit an inflection point where there's billions of dollars in a lot of really fantastic med tech companies that I think are overweight on the sick care,
Yep.
and we're going to invest on the PFA, or whatever the next thing is that is going to invasively treat the heart. If we start to get momentum at some point, there's going to be a loser in that group, and somebody's going to catch on and say, no, I need to be in the early diagnostic space. And maybe the $4 trillion healthcare market becomes a $2 trillion healthcare market. Somebody will win that 2 trillion, and somebody's going to lose the 2 trillion that falls out. But I think the only way it's sustainable for the US in general, and we're particularly poor at healthcare management, is to make this shift to early detection. That's the only way. If we continue to spiral out in cost and continue to come up with great new innovations for treating very sick people, then we'll continue to have costs go up 10% a year in perpetuity, and that's a scary path. So I think hopefully
Yeah.
me and lots of other companies, I'm not the only company working on this, start to make that shift to stay out of the hospital.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's funny enough, right? There's so much. There's still, I mean, I was just got off a call today with somebody running up a huge value care play at a health plan, and we still talk about value care and risk and management and population health for all these years. And yet the Wall Street Journal had a great article yesterday about just the other day about young people people in their 40s getting their hips replaced and knees replaced, and because it's incredibly profitable on a fee-for-service basis for those big hospitals. Obviously, the heart surgery suite going from the stent all the way to the bypass has been a big part of that 4 trillion, and continues to be so. And you, when it starts changing, I think you may find yourself with a target on your back, but that's literally who knows. But
yeah,
to my mind, that's yeah, it's also something which, if we can get people on, if you can if you think about the statins, right, which have been remarkably successful in being sold very widely, and now they're off patent, they're very cheap and all the rest of it. And you're
yeah,
starting to see, I mean, if you play out the GLP-1s, eventually you might get there as well. That right now they're way too expensive, but if you can get kind of cheaper preventative care, hopefully you'll both save a bit of money down the line that very expensive stuff, but also hopefully you'll give people a better quality of life. So you're certainly, in the right direction. Tell me a bit about the company. So, how much money have you raised? And how long have you been doing this?
the company's been around for about 10 years. I've been leading it for the past 2.5. So a little bit over 70 million to date, a lot that went into the device.
Yeah.
And then raised about 15 million over the last 18 months to shift to this advanced diagnostic piece. So it's myself and the CTO who joined at the same time, was on one of the first AI teams for NASA.
Right.
And he's our quantum physics expert. So he's essentially, the brains behind everything we're doing now, as we head towards commercialization.
You should give him a name if you're going to be nice to him.
Ah, oh, Sandeep Gulati. Sandeep Gulati. He's
Yeah.
fantastic. He's in Pasadena. I'm in Nashville. He's out in Pasadena. I probably talk to him more than I talk to my wife. which I wouldn't tell Mrs. Darland, but
We'll think about leaving that part in, or maybe not. Maybe not. All right, brilliant. And then give me a sense about, you said you're about 18 months from finalizing your FDA trials, and what's the plan for commercialization after that?
Yeah, so we're in the ejection fraction trial right now and have a next gen device that we just wrapped up. So we'll probably start commercializing in Q1 of 2025. So not far away.
Not far away.
For now, and we're doing the whole offering as kind of a pilot program with a handful of sites today. So we're pretty close to initial commercialization.
All right, and this is and the first sort of wave is sales out to cardiologists and
EPs. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And
right.
And one of the reasons as we kind of think through the company that I'm optimistic that maybe we're starting to hit this inflection point is one of the I'd say not entirely understood benefits of AI is actually running the companies leaner than you could have even 3 years ago. So logistics and invoicing and revenue cycle management and trial maintenance, all these things that would have taken gigantic amount of capital and people in the past, we can do with largely agents now, which give companies like me a better fighting chance to go disrupt a little bit, as well as extend that runway and lower costs. So I think it's a unique time for us for sure, but I think there's a lot of people probably in a similar position as us that might have an opportunity now that wouldn't have 6 years ago, or shoot, even maybe 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to the sort of AI-enabled agent replacing me, especially if it can do all my writing.
Me too. It's I'm happy. I'm happy to
go and sit and watch YouTube if it'll do all my writing and interviewing for me. But not necessarily true quite yet. Never mind. Anyway, I've been talking with Chris Darland. He is the CEO of Peerbridge Health, which, as you've been discussing, has got a whole new both device and AI tool for early detection of different types of heart disease, and hoping going to make a big difference. Chris, thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.